Thanks so much for your time today.
Oh, no problem, Steve. Anytime.
So what did you think? You and I talked before the game, and then a few hours later the game was over. What were the impressions that struck you about it?
Yeah, they were as clean as they've been all season on offense, but they were also getting chances to make those plays deep. And I think that's really, it's not a surprise. We've all talked about it all year that, that was the next step for the offense, being able to take some of those, some advantage of some of those opportunities to hit plays deep when you're in zero coverage or cover one, and you got a lot of man being played. And I think that's really been the next step for Drew Aller. He's taken those opportunities, and to the credit of the receivers, who we all had questions about, they made plays. And I don't think Maryland, in the secondary, they always put some guys in the NFL. They're a pretty good secondary. I mean, they got some individual talent out there. So I thought that, Olushanu said this morning on his call, the Maryland game came at the right time, and I think Penn State needed a game like that where they played as consistently on offense as they have all season. They made the plays that they're going to need to make to beat a really good team, and I think the big question I have is, what does it do for your confidence, and what does confidence really mean? I think you don't. I guess you don't measure it in any analytical way, but you have to have it coming into a game against Michigan. And I think Penn State is going to be playing with a lot of confidence this week. Now, whether that translates against a very different Michigan defense that's going to have a very different plan, I don't know. But I think Penn State, with what they did against Michigan, puts themselves in a really good position to play during the championship months here, which is what Olu called November. And really, they played well in November last year. I think they're set up for it this year, but this is a huge challenge.
No question, because this is, I mentioned in 17, 19, and 22, years where Penn State ended up going to a New Year's Six bowl game and winning all three, the Fiesta, Cotton, and Rose Bowls. They got to November in each of those years, Donnie, and there was never a game that could move them any further up. That's not this year. That game is this week. What's your thought on that because of how the schedule is played out?
Yeah, that's a good point, because last year, you played strong in November, but it was not a good schedule. It was not the kind of schedule, like you said, that's going to move you up into fifth place or and any higher in the playoff. But this is a game that changes everything. If you go out and win it, I don't want to say people forget about Ohio State, but I think you can forget about Ohio State and what happened out there. And look, in a lot of ways, if you're of the belief that Michigan is better than Ohio State, and I'm not certain that they're not, I think that they have played the way they've played them the last 2 years. I think certainly they'd be the favorite again this year. If Penn State could beat Michigan, figure out a way to get it done, they're in the driver's seat in a way. If Michigan could beat Ohio State later in the year, and assuming you get the three-way tie scenario, their tiebreaker is better. So I think this is this is one game that has that feeling of the 2016 Ohio State game to me, where it doesn't seem likely on paper, but if you can get it done, no matter how you have to get it done, it could change the outlook for you. And they won that game, and that was it. They took off for a couple of months from there. I think that this game presents itself in that way for Penn State. And look, the other thing with Michigan is they have never been as dominant against Penn State in Happy Valley as they've been in Ann Arbor. I mean, this is just a different program when you see them on the road. So I think Penn State is set up in a way. But the question is Michigan man for man too good for it? And I think I came into the season thinking Penn State would have to prove it to me against Michigan, and they're going to have to prove it this week. But I think they know that. And look, when you go out to Ohio State and lay an egg, and I think they laid an egg in a lot of different facets of the game on offense, that does provide some motivation to go out there and prove that was the fluke and not history being the fluke, which, let's see how that goes. But I think Penn State's got a lot to play for, and Michigan hasn't played a team like this. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, because I want to get to that point in a moment, but I did want to bring up Dante Cephas first, because you had mentioned the wide receiver stepping up. he primarily is the guy that stepped up. 2 touchdown catches in the game, reliable. They were both really good catches. Are you starting to see in him the balance to Keandre Lambert-Smith on the other side, or do you still need to see more?
Starting to see it for sure. And I think with Cephas, the thing was always consistency. James mentioned that a lot. Consistency with route running, consistency with practice. And he wasn't brought in to be a fourth receiver. He was brought in to be what he was against Maryland. And I think the play, certainly that first touchdown, great throw by Drew. And Cephas did an athletic job to get his feet down. That was pretty good coverage on that throw. But, that's a touchdown they hadn't scored all year. That style of touchdown outside of Keandre. And Cephas gets it for him. But I think the play that he made that was most encouraging, I think, for Penn State's offense was the second touchdown. Because that's a good cornerback covering him. And he got a lot of separation right off the line. He did a really good job, ran a great route. Drew put it right on him. He hauls it in. He played with a lot of confidence after that first touchdown. And, there was so much talk the week before about Drew with the, does the interception help him? And I've heard a couple of players say that they thought that might free him up a little bit. And I don't necessarily buy that. But I certainly think the first touchdown catch for Cephas might free him up a little bit, get him playing with a little more confidence. So I think that's a big deal. And if he plays like a number 2 or a number 1 guy going forward, and look, Penn State's counting on him. They have him for a while here. They want him to play like that. So obviously they want him to play like that. So I think that would help. But they also, McLean has played a lot the last couple of weeks. Saunders had a couple of targets, and it took a really nice play to prevent him from getting a touchdown. Really, maybe a really lucky play for Maryland in a way to keep him from scoring a touchdown. So I think the receivers played better, but I think some of that was the coverage. But I think I don't know if the coverage had much to do with Cephas' game. I think it was him playing with a lot more confidence. So, and that's what they need, because Keandre is a confident guy. We all know that, and they needed somebody else to kind of play with that mentality and that attitude. And Cephas came out and did it.
So, Donnie, I'm going to go back now and jump back to the end of what you were talking about when it came to Michigan. I don't know about you, but until I watched tapes this week, I had not watched Michigan play this year. And the reason I hadn't watched them play this year, there wasn't a single game that, as a fan, I wanted to watch. I mean, in other words, like, let's take Saturday night. I know Jack Ham and I were driving back on Saturday night, but we listened to Washington USC on the radio, and we listened to Alabama LSU. And Jack would check his phone to see what the Purdue score was with Michigan. I mean, if I'm home, I would have been going back and forth between those two games. I would not have been watching Michigan. And they haven't played anybody that, like, where I sat back and like, hey, I can't wait for that game. So what do you think of, I mean, how difficult? We know they're really good. Okay, we know that. But do we know how good?
Yeah, I don't know if we're truly going to know until this week, because, yeah, what is them playing Michigan State and them playing whoever, what does that tell you? It doesn't really mean much. And I bring up Michigan State because that's the team I saw them play. They played Sparty when we were in Columbus, and after the game, Rich Scarcella and I went to eat, and they had it on the big screen. But I'm not sure anywhere else in the country had that game on the big screen. Yeah. It just happened to be in Columbus, Ohio. So that's the only reason I've seen them. But I would have been in the same boat. I would have never. There had been no occasion to watch a Michigan game for me, because what does it prove? And they haven't had a prove-it moment this year. And I don't know if it's going to matter if they get off to this great start at 14-0.
Sure.
I don't know if it matters. But if it's 10-10 in the third quarter, if it's the Ohio State game, let's say if it's the same kind of style, it's a rock fight in the second half. It's a one-score game, and then I think it might matter. So that's where I think James has said a couple of times this year where, the object is, and of course it's the object. You can't lose more than once. The object is try to go undefeated. But I think there's value in playing somebody in your non-conference schedule who could tie their shoes. And Michigan hasn't done that, and
right.
they will in the future. To be fair to them, I think they have Texas coming up.
Texas next year.
They will in the future.
Right.
Yeah, but this year they went for that theory where we got to do our best to go undefeated, or at least the one loss. And I think, congratulations, they set themselves up. They've looked very impressive every week, but now they have a real game. They have a real opponent on the road in a hostile environment. It's going to be nuts at Beaver Stadium, and they're going to have to show what they really are. And I don't know if they know what they really are yet. And Penn State, if they can make this game, if they could turn this game into what Ohio State was to a degree, stay in it. If they want to play better, of course. But if that's a close game, I think you see a very different Michigan team than we've seen all season. And now, again, they come out and score 14 early. Entirely different story.
Yeah, and as you know, I've said before, look, the really good teams aren't in close games. But, let's take, for example, Duke basketball, and I've talked about this before as well. Yeah, they're not in really close games with Mike. But then eventually you do have to play North Carolina. Now, that is going to be a close game, right? So the teams you're expected to not be in close games in, okay, you go from there. And they're in that spot. They're a really good team. They have not been in a close game. But at some point, you do have to cross that road. And that includes, obviously, a talented quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, who has, been a difference maker for them.
Yeah, he's a terrific player. And look, the game they lost, we could, make all the comments we want, but there was the one game, last year where they may not have had signals or whatever. We don't make all the jokes we want, but it was also that TCU game, one game where McCarthy played really bad.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and if he plays well, that's a really good offense. It just is, and I'm not sure they get credit for being as potent on offense as Ohio State is, but their running game is obviously really good. It's Edwards and Corum, and I'm not sure it's as dynamic as Corum pre-injury, but it's still a pretty good Blake Corum. And it's a pretty good receiving core. Roman Wilson is a clutch player. He's a very, very underrated guy to me.
Yes.
And Loveland, the tight end, is I think better than all who they had a couple of years ago is at Iowa now. So I think this is a team that is better potentially on offense than they've been in a while. I think this is a team that can win the national championship. Or they can come in and not play well at Beaver Stadium again and make it really difficult on themselves. Who knows? But yeah, we're going to have to see it. And the other thing is, we don't know. This is a team that's got a lot going on. With the sign stuff and Harbaugh's availability and things like that. We don't know how that's affecting the players. And again, close game. Who knows? Do they start doubting themselves a little bit? How do they react? I think we learn a lot about Michigan either way this week. We learn a lot about. We could learn a lot about Penn State. But I think this is definitely a game where you're going to learn a lot more about Michigan.
Oh, no, we'll learn a lot more about both teams, Donnie. I mean, in terms of road environment, they played in Nebraska, but it's not Beaver Stadium because Nebraska, they're an underdog at that point.
Nebraska's not Penn State.
Right. They're not a contending team like Penn State is where the stakes are so high. And this crowd, there's going to be over 110,000. And when you go on the road, and you do have to either do silent count or hand signal, whatever you do, it does take away your typical cadence. And to be honest with you, again, it's another position Michigan's not used to being in.
Yeah, we've seen that in the past where Michigan comes in for the whiteout. That's the famous one. The first play of the game, they couldn't get the signal in with Patterson when they have to call timeout with 15 minutes showing on the clock in the first quarter. And I think that's where last week comes in a little bit because Penn State really needs a good crowd this week. They need an active crowd. They need a circus there. They really do. And I think last week playing as well as they did, I think that kind of draws people back in. It's the old Jack Nicholson line. They've drawn me back in. Or I think it was Jack Nicholson. I don't know. But they've drawn me back in, and I think there's that feeling with the Penn State fans now, where they can kind of see, well, this really is not going to take a whole lot, other than the whole act of beating Michigan, which is difficult enough in itself.
Sure.
But if that could, if Penn State could do that, and if they could play well in this game, then the whole season changes. The whole outlook changes. What happened in Columbus, at that point, it's the past. Now, yeah, and again, they have to be able to go out and do that. But I think they're going to have a crowd this week that's going to help them get there.
How important is it for everybody at Penn State? I'm talking about James, the players, anybody associated with the football program, that when it comes to the ancillary issues with Michigan right now, they just play it cool and stay away from it?
I would stay away from it 100%. I would pretend it doesn't. I think the way James has to play this, and I think to a degree he's done this, pretend it's not even an issue. Pretend, they operate like they got the signals. But I would do that every week.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I would do that to a degree.
Yeah.
So, I think he played it right yesterday. Talk about how good this team is on film, what you're seeing, and just go from there. You can't make it about that. I think one thing me personally, I think they give Penn State gives a lot of credit. I think, maybe not publicly, but in their meetings, watching film, I think they give a lot of credit to Ohio State and Michigan. And I think you have to go out there and kind of be aggressive against them, and just go out and play kind of the way you play against Maryland, if that's even possible. I'm not sure it's possible mentality-wise with the players, but just go out and do that and be aggressive with it. But I would kind of, if I were James, just come out and say, look, we don't care about if they have our signals, great, good for them. But if we execute what we're doing, they can't stop it anyway. That would be my approach to it as a coach. But you privately behind the scenes, you have to have some contingency plans for that, and I'm sure they do. But yeah, I think the public approach to that has to be this week. You can't make that a story. You have to make that something that they talk about in Ann Arbor and not in State College, because it doesn't help you. It doesn't help you to have an excuse.
Right, exactly. Like, you know what? Show up on Saturday, whomever's out there, play, and go from there. Donnie, always a pleasure. Great to see you on Saturday. Always appreciate you very much.
Hope to see you again this week, Steve.
He is one of the best ones out there covering the Penn State beat on a consistent basis, and that is Frank Bodani, York Daily Record. And, Frank, it was great to see you Saturday in College Park.
You too, Steve. Thanks for the great introduction and for...
Right. I had to tell that one. I don't think anybody knew about that, about the George Paterno story.
Anytime you go cross-country in the middle of the season, right? Things happen.
Yeah, things happen. But here's a hint. If you have a flight from New York to Los Angeles that does have a stop in Detroit, don't get off the plane.
That's your advice, right?
A message from this station and the ad council. All right. Okay, so Frank, you watched the game on Saturday. As you've evaluated this team in game number 9, what were your thoughts on this performance?
To me, I come away thinking with so much talent on the team, but with a lot of uneven moments. It seems to me, at least, that they would have they're in their best mental, emotional state, I would think, after that game, because they dominated in a lot of ways all 3 phases, maybe the best they've done that all year, or at least since the beginning of the year to me. And if you're doing that at this point, right, when you really need it in the stretch run before your biggest game of the season, no matter what else, that's at least a good starting point. That's a good place to be.
What did you think of the performance of Drew Aller on Saturday?
Night and day from Ohio State, for one. I think he just looked confident and almost like freed. I don't know if that's even the right word, but he didn't look like there was any weight on his shoulders, where I don't know, at times it did before. Like maybe not trying to make a mistake, not trying to do everything absolutely perfect, and he just played. And I think it's what you saw against Maryland, I think to a lot of people, is the quarterback that you expected for a long time, because he's always had that arm to make those throws, but to me, was helping his receivers. You know, a lot of times I think people talk about the other way around, how the receivers help the quarterback, but anticipating where guys are, making the quick decision, the release, I think he made his receivers and tight ends even look better. And I think that's a skill that he has. And it was on full display. He looked confident beginning to end. So, a great sign for this Saturday.
You look at Keandre Lambert-Smith, who has been the primary target along with the tight ends. What can it mean moving forward if Dante Cephas can balance it out and do on a consistent basis what he did on Saturday?
Well, it's huge, because that's the one thing, right? I mean, Penn State has always, a lot of times, has had a really, not just a number one guy, but they've had a couple other guys that, opponents had to worry about, they had to concern themselves with. Maybe not so much this year, and that makes life really hard on KLS, if everybody's focusing on him so he gets help. And Dante Cephas was supposed to be that guy with all his experience. Well, it seems like maybe he was trending in this direction for maybe a little bit of time, at least behind the scenes, and now he's there. So that's big. But, I mean, it's just like one play in that game Saturday that I just go back to him and Drew, is that Drew pump fakes, holds the defense, and just fires a rope to Keandre running through the middle of the field. It went for 38 yards, and it was like, that play is there, but it really hasn't maybe been there. Mm-hmm. It hasn't worked. It worked great, and I think there's more of that, and I think Dante Cephas just can help with that. Got to worry about him.
We know we've seen with Nicholas Singleton a couple of kickoffs, including the 51-yarder he had on Saturday, and what he's been involved in the pass game. But the last couple of games, the guy that's had the better success running the ball has been Katron Allen. What have you seen from him?
Oh my goodness! I want that guy to be running full steam and the number one guy to start Saturday, because I think his physicality, Steve, is off the charts. He wants it. He doesn't just get his yards. He makes opponents pay, and I think that pays a toll. And he embraces that, and I think that's hard to find, right? A guy who has his talent at finding yards, finding crevices, making short, quick moves in traffic, and then going the right direction really fast. I mean, and then he wants to make contact, and I think when did you see a cartoon play like the carrying half the line into the end zone like that? Right. So love Nick Singleton. Nick Singleton always has a place. Great kickoff returner. I mean, I think utilizing them both to their strengths right now, Saturday, to me, is the best thing. And that may mean running Katron more as a tailback.
Well, now let's get to the defensive side of it. Abdul Carter did a lot of terrific things last season. Did you see a lot of the old Abdul Carter show up on Saturday?
Yeah, we were waiting for it, man. I mean, it's like everybody saw what that guy could do in the backfield last year as a pursuer, a rusher. And the plays really just, for whatever reasons, just weren't there. I think he came into Saturday with just 2 tackles for loss and a sack, and that's not him. Right. Not with his talent, not with his size and speed. And so then you saw it. And James talked about it a little bit today at his press conference. It goes beyond the statistics. It's the feel that he has, that when you see his performance, he's all over the field. So it's not even the number of I mean, he made life pretty hellish on Talia, right? Because even if he didn't get there, he was rushing. He was a presence. You had to worry about him, and he's got to be able to do that. And it means more when you don't have your two of your defensive ends that are good rushers, right? You have to have Abdul Carter's ability there.
And this was, to this point, I think the best passing game they were going to see going into the game. That was the mindset and the thought process. Now, McCarthy's a better quarterback, in my opinion, no doubt in my mind. But as a passing game, this is a really good passing game. What was your thought on how Penn State played them?
Really well, because and the statistics, and you've seen games like this. You probably think maybe a Doug Flutie or Talley completed 17 straight. He was really good, but it wasn't beating Penn State. And I don't think you ever got the sense that he could have completed 40 passes and wasn't going to beat Penn State, because Penn State knew what they needed to do defensively and were right there, right? I mean, giving up the completions is fine if you don't let them get what they really need, which is the big plays, right? They weren't giving up much yards after catch. They were playing them tight, playing them without making mistakes. They weren't missed assignments. It was kind of reminding me when Penn State would play Purdue and had Drew Brees and some of those quarterbacks. They could rack up all the yards they wanted, but they weren't going to beat you in the end zone, and they weren't going to beat you in the game. And I think, yeah, Penn State's secondary played a very refined game, did the things they just needed to do one play after another, right? Not heroes, just really sound.
Part of any formula to winning is going to be playing well on special teams. It may be, I know everybody says it's a third of the game. It's not. You and I both know it's about 17% of the game, something like that. How well do you think Penn State has played special team-wise, not just this game, but really the past month?
Yeah, I think they've exceeded expectations. I think that would be the one area of the team that has gone above what you thought. And that's hard to do, right? When Penn State comes in with so much hype around the season and players on both sides of the ball, I think people had concerns, especially about the kicking game. And I think that, you know, Riley Thompson and Alex Felkin's probably maybe two of the most improved players in a sense. I mean, how reliable they become, especially field goal kicking. I mean, he's automatic. I mean, I think the kicks in Maryland, maybe the last one could have been good from 60. I mean, he just looks dialed in. And I think that's huge. And they've been good on coverage teams for a long time, and that's continued. And Daquan Hardy, you know, you get to see it much in Maryland, but you could argue he's the most explosive player. He gets votes for most explosive player in the team at the moment. Yeah. And that could, you know, who knows what Michigan's going to do punting the ball, but that's a weapon back there.
All right, so I said earlier that one thing that's interesting about Michigan, to me, is that I haven't really watched them play that often this season because they haven't had a game I was interested in watching. Now, I'm going to watch them, obviously, this week to get ready for the game. It's not like I don't know anything about them. But they haven't played what you call interesting games, like going into the week, the matchups, like, hey, you know what, I need to watch that. That should be terrific. Notre Dame, Ohio State, Ohio State, Maryland. I mean, like, interesting matchup. To me, they haven't had anyone. Have you even watched them this year?
No, not one bit. And part of it's our job, right, because we're tied up a lot of Saturdays with Penn State.
Sure.
But to me, they're just a nondescript machine. And that's not to be negative necessarily about them.
That's a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, but kind of faceless. I mean, everybody knows J.J. McCarthy maybe, and they know they have two great running backs, but they just seem like they just roll down the field no matter who they're playing. But what do you know about them? In any type of tough situation. I don't think they've really had. I mean, they played in Nebraska, but they haven't played in a really hostile environment, I wouldn't say.
No.
They haven't played much away from home. They barely have played really a team with a winning record. Now, granted, few of their teams have winning records, but 5-4.
Right, Rutgers. I think Rutgers is actually a good team, not a great team. No. I think Rutgers is a good team.
Could you make the case that that's the best team they play?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's no knock again on Rutgers either. But I mean, come on, we're getting toward the middle of November, and that's the best team you played. So how do they react in a different situation? Maybe they are so good at being dialed into what they're doing. Maybe it won't matter. But I kind of have to see it then to believe it, right? Because you haven't had a chance to see it yet, which is really unusual. I don't know if I can remember a season when a team as such has gone this far without really being tested in some ways at all.
And you know my theory on all this is always that, hey, the really good teams aren't in close games. I mean, there's a reason why you're not in close games. You're really good,
right.
All right? But you do get to that game where, like, now, so let's take Duke basketball. Duke basketball was rarely in any close games with Mike Krzyzewski until they got to play North Carolina, and then they get into those key games, and then they got into close games because both teams are really good. But that's where they are right now. They're a really good team, and they haven't really played anybody that is athletically on their level.
And I'm wondering too, it's just simple adversity, and this may not even have to. This may just be circumstances. Have they really had to deal with anything other than the investigation and scrutiny around the team? But I mean, on the field, have they had to deal with really anything going wrong much? I think J.J. McCarthy might have threw a few interceptions early against, like, I don't know, one of the non-conf Bowling Green or something. But I mean, really. So I go back to 94. I mean, Penn State played a couple of difficult teams early in that season, but adversity, did they have a lot of it? And then they go to Illinois, and they have all kinds of adversity, right? Right. And they're rolling over most people, but you saw how they had to deal with it. And like you said, the good teams deal with it. And at some point, Michigan's going to have some things go wrong when it matters against them. And I don't know if that's happened. So, will this Saturday, can Penn State make that happen in a way this Saturday?
Right. Look, Michigan may be this good. All right. Let's give credit where credit's due. They may be this good. We know how terrific their running back quorum is, and Edwards is a terrific receiver. We know that McCarthy is just every year he gets better. He's a good quarterback. And Roman Wilson and Junior Colson on defense and Samra Still and Will Johnson and Page. They've got players. But to be honest with you, in this particular year, I don't know on this day actually how good they are this year because of what you just said.
Yeah, and I think their running game should be every bit as good. It hasn't been as dominating, maybe statistically, and they weren't even really great running the ball last week against Rutgers.
Purdue.
I mean, Purdue is not a bad defense, right? They got a good defensive head coach, but they weren't great. They don't have the numbers. They have the same guys at running back. They don't have the numbers. I think J.J. McCarthy, though, to your point, is such a key because I don't know can you rattle him? Can you get to him? Can Penn State's pass rush or any pass rush get to him quick enough consistently? That's might be more important than even the run game. Penn State, I think, has really solidified their rush defense attack overall. Maybe they're not suffocating against every single opponent, but the numbers are there, right? And they've improved a lot in the last year since when they played Michigan before. So to me, J.J. McCarthy is the guy they have to be able to disrupt. And I don't think they did that as much as they needed to against Kyle McCord throughout, so they have another shot at that. And I think Abdul Carter, we mentioned, I mean, he's got to be a guy. Can they get Chop Robinson and Amin Vanover back? But I think they got to mess with J.J. McCarthy somehow.
Always a pleasure, Frank. Always appreciate the great analysis.
Oh, absolutely. Look forward to seeing you Saturday, Steve.
Sounds great, Frank. Thanks so much, my friend.
Okay, all the best.